Hello, and welcome to the League of Canadian Poets 2021 Feminist Caucus in Conversation series. My name is Aisha Chatterjee, and I'm chair of the Feminist Caucus. This year, we're delighted to have as host Renee Sarajini Sakliker. Renee is a poet and lawyer who lives in Vancouver on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people. Her collection, Children of Air India, won the Canadian Authors Association Poetry Prize, and she's also co-author of the poetry and essay collection, Listening to the Bees, which won the Independent Publisher Book Awards Gold Medal in 2019 in the Ecology Environment category. In each of this year's 3 podcasts, Renee invites a pair of Canadian poets to sit down with her and talk about what she aptly calls compassionate feminism. The Feminist Caucus is very proud to provide space to these strong voices from across the country and for these conversations.
I've been honored this year to be asked to curate the Feminist Caucus Conversation series, and our topic is compassionate feminism. And I'm going to begin by acknowledging that I'm here on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam nations. There was a lot of sunshine yesterday. Today it's overcast. We are bracing ourselves here for another atmospheric river. And I'm sending powerful heart vibes to everybody impacted by our climate emergency and pandemic. And just so my 2 incredible poet guests know, Grace Lau and Margo LaPierre, welcome. I'm just going to share with both of you a little bit about myself, do a little framing, and then I will read your bios. So welcome, Grace.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm thrilled. Margo, welcome.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Just a total honor. Right. So I'm Renee Sarajini, as I said. I'm the author of 4 poetry books. My latest is an epic fantasy in verse, merging docu-poetics, which I established in my first book-length collection, Children of Air India. And then I've merged it with more formalist epic traditions in this latest book, Brahma and the Beggar Boy. I curate lunch poems at SFU, a Vancouver poetry reading series at Simon Fraser University downtown, as well as curating this year Vancouver's first ever poetry phone. You can find out more about me and these projects at my various websites. The main one for my lifelong poetry project is the Canada. There's a question mark in their project. And there's lots about me in anthologies, interviews, and poetry journals. And you can find me on Twitter at Renee Sarajini and other social media. So these are indeed tough times we live in. Pandemic inequities and our climate change emergency and the ongoing pain of racial and economic injustice act as clarion calls to action. In today's conversation with Grace and Margo, we're looking at the topic of compassionate feminism and how we as poets might embody this idea, particularly given the fractures of pain so relevant in our world. And as a poet and woman of color, I'm so grateful to have these 2 poets with us. So without further ado, I'm going to read their biographies, and then I'm going to pause and turn to each one of them, because sometimes there are formal biographies, which I think are important for our listeners so they get a feel for both of you. Sometimes they can feel constricting. So I'll pause after I do the formal reading and check in with you both. And you can add or tell me if I've missed anything. So to begin, Grace Lau is a Hong Kong-born Chinese-Canadian settler living in Ontario on the traditional and treaty territory of the Anishinaabe people, now known as the Chippewa Tri-Council, comprised of the Beausoleil First Nation, the Rama First Nation, and the Georgina Island First Nation. Her debut collection of poetry, and I'm so excited about, The Language We Were Never Taught to Speak, is published by Guernica Editions. Her work has appeared in Grain Magazine, Contemporary Verse 2, Frontier Poetry, Arc Poetry, and elsewhere. You can find her on social media at Thrill and Grace. Grace, anything I missed or that you wanted to add or comment on?
No, that was perfect, Renee. Thank you.
You're so welcome. A pleasure and an honor to have you here. Margo LaPierre is a queer, bipolar editor and author of Washing Off the Raccoon Eyes by Guernica Editions 2017. She serves as newsletter editor of Arc Poetry magazine, membership chair of Editors Ottawa Gatineau, and is a member of Poetry Collective 7. She won the 2020 Subterrane Lush Triumphant Award for her fiction, and her work has been published widely in such places as Room Magazine, Arc Poetry, Filling Station, Carousel, Prism, and others. She's currently completing her MFA in creative writing at UBC, my alma mater, and you can find Margo on Twitter at Margo LaPierre. Welcome, Margo.
Thank you so much, Renee. I would just like to add that I am tuning in from Ottawa, which is the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And did I miss anything else or
No,
anything?
not at all. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. So I'm wondering if we might open first with Grace and then with Margo, and we'll leave lots of time for some pausing to give space to the following, to read some poetry to begin this conversation about compassionate feminism. Grace, would you mind reading a poem or two, and maybe it will embody this idea of compassionate feminism?
Yeah, I'd love to. I can start with one poem
Thank
that
you.
I wrote about a
Please.
year ago. And this one is called The Thing with Asian Women Drumming. Just a quick backstory for this poem. When I was living in Toronto, there's a drumming group of women, and they're called RAW. And RAW stands for, I think, Raging Asian Women. And they do taiko drumming, which is I think, traditional Japanese form of drumming. And I saw one of their performances in real life before COVID times, and it was just one of the most amazing experiences I had in a while. So I wrote this poem after that performance. The thing with Asian women drumming on the taiko is it has to be seen to be believed. An unquiet Asian woman shedding her silence by taking out her anger on the taut skin of a dead animal. It is as if I am listening to one of women's oldest secrets, how to coax pain into rage and rage into ecstasy, a frantic alchemy. It is as if I am being shaken loose from my own small life, reaching through the tender tendrils of the earth to the mother, of the sister, of the aunt, of the... It is as if I am hearing my own power for the first time on the drum, drum, drum. Thank you.
It's so incredible. I'm just wanting to give space for that extraordinary poem and your beautiful reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Shimmering air. Yeah. Oh my goodness, went right into my soul. And our listeners can't see us. We can see each other on Zencaster. And Margo, just the serenity and the compassion on your face as you were listening, it was very, very moving.
I just melted into that poem.
Indeed. Indeed. Margo, would you like to share a poem that maybe touches on some of these ideas of compassionate feminism?
Sure. You know what? You would think that Grace and I were together and had picked out our poems together just based on what I choose.
Oh, I love it.
What I've chosen to speak. So this is called Elegy for Enna Barmina, and it's a glossa from Lisa Robertson's stanza. I designed my own passivity. I present it to you by my face, by your guts, and in the name of human space. I was born into a rough little city, site of hasty invention, actively dissolving into steel sky. The city was a glittering ruin sucked upwards. So that's the glossa. And if anyone isn't familiar with that form, essentially what I've done is I have a prose poem and I've ended each stanza of the prose poem with one of these lines. Because my mind I went to books. Because I went to books, my mind didn't go too far. These receptacles pour into and out of each other, sine, fine, 2 tongues. I kept it for me at first, this hexagonal knowledge, expensive reading of grammar between my ears. I designed my own passivity. I present it to you by my face, by your virtuous sweater, mucked and trodden, your cough and esophagus, the question of cells under fingernails, bruises wept a culvert swelling with salamanders and storm, sewage over your thighs, soft metal pine needles, bed of thieves, what movie corpses in milky swamps do, splay guts, and in the name of human space. I was born into a rough system of dominance, scroll of bodies in perpetuum, buckwheat zucchini bikini bodies, tennis tan bodies, hairy pubis bodies, smooth boned bodies, glazed chunky donuts, telling me I am beautiful, showing me I am ugly, intelligent app itching to turn my skin into a lens, all seeing body void of pores and valleys. A screen floated your name. I learnt of you in my kitchen. Gnats clicked into you, unfurled from your throat, Codex Lilium, rooting in the mud of your little city, site of hasty invention actively dissolving into steel sky. Because you could not speak, I went to speak. What we did with trees here, we bent and echoed, bent and flailed arms. A lamppost flickered our souls made of eels. We traveled on land and through murky water. A car turned its beams on the procession. We were speaking in text at last. Intruded writing bodies, penetrated bodies, powerful names hanging from points of entry bodies, ginger ale bodies fizzing with anger, stifled career bodies, choke cherry bodies, bodies choosing to be naked if shame is all there is to wear, and the city was a glittering ruin sucked upwards.
Loved
Wow.
that. The juxtaposition and the
Yeah.
repetition and the gaze, like even though it's being read, like visually, I just felt that gaze throughout. Thank you, Margo.
I feel like we're
Very.
on such a synchronicity wave between those two poems, though. Like, am I the only one who sees that? Like, those would be right next to each other in a book or an anthology.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. I'm really glad that you chose a glossa too, because that I love glossas, and one of the poems in my book is also one. And when I discovered that form, it was, and I think we'll touch on this later as well in the conversation, but it's such an interesting form to write to and being in conversation with another poet. And yeah, we'll get more into later.
It really is. It feels like we're in conversation with other, and I write to a lot of other women and non-binary folk, usually, but it feels like a conversation over time, like a little time travel thing happening.
Indeed, it does. So rich. Just to listen to both of you both read the poems and then to be in conversation. I'm really interested in this juxtaposition of compassion, compassionate feminism, with the need, the necessity to rid the body, as I think Margot's incantation does, of preoccupations of the shame triggered by gaze, and also to shed as a South Asian woman. When Grace's beautiful poem mentions the shedding of anger, the acceptance of Asian women somehow as being expressionless, but then also about compassion. So I wondered if I could start there with Grace, that this idea that really came to me when I was asked to curate this conversation was anger can be necessary and righteous and needed. And then there's also this thing that's happening right now with, I think, women with each other in our communities, where the anger might be sometimes misdirected onto ourselves or others. I just wanted to ask you, Grace, did you have any thoughts about that when we're thinking about a compassionate feminism. What is your response to that?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great starting point. And I think your comment on anger and righteous anger is something that I think some people, when they hear about it, it just makes you feel this negative sort of feeling of anger is not good or it's not comfortable to see or to hear. But if we're being compassionate with ourselves, I think anger is sometimes necessary, because if someone, mistreats you, or if you're going through something that you shouldn't have, whether it's trauma or other past experiences, the anger helps soothe it almost. Not to say that it's healthy to be always angry all the time for the rest of your life, but I don't know. I think sometimes it can be a balm, it can be, depending on the person and how they choose to handle their experiences, I think it can be helpful.
Yes, so thoughtful a response. Margo, did you have a response to what we're hearing from Grace?
I do. And I think of the drum image in the
Mm-hmm.
poem, which was so powerful, that tautness. And to me, that is like the way I read it,
Mm-hmm.
received it, was as a symbol for anger and of it receiving the speaker's anger. And I think it's so telling that the drum is also a symbol for communication
Mm-hmm.
and community. It's something that we do in community, and it can be a way to communicate as well. And I think that communication and anger have a very important connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can be hard to communicate things that we are angry about.
Yeah. Which then leads it inward sometimes, which is not
Hmm.
great for your mental health at times.
No,
Yeah.
no.
And it makes it an individual thing. So many of the
Mm-hmm.
things that we have a right to be angry about are not individual injustices. Like once we start to speak about them, and I think that we are doing that more now, we realize that we can actually have actionable conversations about what to do about these things if we are given the space, if we give ourselves the space to talk about it
Mm-hmm.
with each other.
Like now, my thought is that both your poems release a juxtaposition between anger and healing in ways that I experience as
Mm-hmm.
healing. So, Grace, your opening poem, which served like an invocation for this slant to our conversation on compassionate feminism, I was struck by the fact that the speaker in the poem is not willy-nilly misdirecting her anger. She's purposeful and intentful and is doing a creative act, and that the anger is expressed and embodied from the body to the drum and released, so that the imprisonment of the stereotype of the silent, expressionless Asian woman is
Mm-hmm.
transformed. But what do you think when I say
I
that?
think that is a very compassionate reading of it, to use a word that we're using today. But yeah, 100%. I think that's one of the reasons why I was so struck after I watched that drumming performance, because the way that, I don't know if either of you have seen taiko drumming before, but there is so much nuance to it. You can be very loud and fast with the drumming, and that evokes anger or joy. And the way that the raw was drumming was incredible, because they evoked all of those different emotions in you with maybe a short song, maybe a minute or like a 2-minute song. And that way, and the reason why I use the word alchemy in the poem was because, yes, there is that, the rage, the anger, but through the form, like through the act of drumming, it transformed it. It became something entirely different. And something that could have been destructive became healing.
Oh my goodness, absolutely. And this idea of anger is a taboo often for women, particularly women of color,
Mm-hmm.
perhaps also for queer women or women who are experiencing mental health. And I wondered, Margo, if you wanted to respond to some of these aspects of what we're talking about under this rubric of compassion.
Let me think for a moment. It's something that comes up a lot because this is sort of my primary emotion a lot of the times is anger, more so than sadness. And it's learning not to be closed off. I recently had my therapist explain to me something about having like a stance that you can take, and it's to have your palms open and to just have your mouth like a little bit curled up and to just be in a receptive mode. And so if you are angry, at least you're receiving and it's not an immediate output, like there's time to process. So the body is it's really important to pay attention to the body and not just the thoughts, and to actually let the feelings go through the body and let the body mediate it.
My goodness. Profound, actually. Simple and profound, as so often. It's very courageous to share. I'm wondering if I might just steer us, guide us to this central question that I think we're exploring that animates a lot of my work on this, having dealt with historical, political, personal trauma expressed through my first book, which was the murder of my auntie and uncle in a terrorist act many, many years ago. This animating question of what hurts, what helps, what heals, and listening to Margo and Grace, I'm thinking I'd love to ask you both, maybe starting with Margo because of this beautiful image of the open hands, even when we might be in a place of anger. Thinking about you, Margo, and then I will ask Grace this. Are there practices right now that you engage in, such you've just described, maybe there are other things, about self-healing or self-compassion? What are you able to do right now for yourself for self-care?
A big one is community. I have a community of poets, my collective 7, and just reaching out to them and letting them know where I'm at. So sometimes I like to pull away when I'm feeling more negative emotions and I have a hard time connecting. And even just a case of being like, hey, I'm okay. I'm just doing a little bit of time alone. But it's important, I think, to have people that you can trust, and even just to say those things. Those people help me so much, like the people in my life. Community to me is the most important thing. It's the most sustaining thing that I've had throughout the pandemic.
Yeah, sustaining community. Thank you. I think it is a clarion call for those of us who may feel outside community. How can we help ourselves by maybe connecting or finding? Grace, how about you? What are you doing right now for self-care?
Oh man, taking long bubble baths. I
Nice.
totally agree with Margo. And that's one of the reasons why I was excited to be speaking with Margo as well, because I thought of 7. And when we talked about, I think, community and compassion, having that collective, like, it's been so cool just seeing them interact on Twitter and social media and the work they be able to do together. For me, I'm still earlier in that journey. In terms of community, ever since I moved away from Toronto, which is a bigger city, I'm in Midland now, which is about a 90-minute drive from Toronto. It's a smaller town. I've definitely been feeling that distance a bit more. And honestly, I found myself being on social media more, trying to keep up with the writing community and poets that I know on Twitter and Instagram. And that in itself, it's not quite the same as, physically being close, but I'll take that. I'll take what I can get at this point. But other than that, I think for a writer, like for poets, so often we're submitting and we're looking for journals or magazines that have their submission periods open. And before, I used to be very hard on myself if I missed a deadline, or like, oh, the period's closed or the submittable caps have been reached for a certain journal. And now I'm just like, well, no, if there's always going to be another period, and if you can't write something new within a certain period of time, that is not the end of the world. You might just need a little bit more time to let the poems in your mind ferment a little bit. And when you do end up writing them, it'll probably be a more finished product, a more refined poem, whatever it may be. Just little things like that, I think, for writing, the writing process, for me, it's been a shift in my approach to it that's really helped, mentally at least.
Absolutely. It's so important to forgive ourselves about the means of production and are we producing enough? Margo, did you have thoughts or responses to what Grace is saying?
I think that's such a healthy response. And what you said about there's always another deadline and there's always another opportunity. It's never the end if you miss something. Like, there are so many opportunities out there for publication.
Margo, your collective and the other work you do, your editing, can you talk a little bit more about women, like as a feminist member of the League, as a woman, doing the things you do? These ideas we were kind of teasing out for a conversation, which was respect, admiration, curiosity. Are there women in your life right now or people in your life that you really feel like give you a kind of mentorship in what you're doing or specific support?
Oh, I feel like I have a very big list. Let me name the people in my collective because I need to name them. So we have Manahal Bandakwala, Chris Johnson, Helen Robertson, Ellen Chang Richardson, Conyer Clayton, and Nina Jane Dristek. And those people, we are all mentors to each other. We're all in a very similar place in our careers. Like, we've been here in the space for a long time, but we're still at the beginning, like the emerging, the ever emerging poets. But we really do support each other, and we've kind of been able to make some leaps this year ever since we did get together. I've had some mentors who, like Shira Naiman is in my editing, which is sort of a different track for me than poetry. I have it's not all one conglomerate community, but she's an author that I worked with Guernica Editions and was the first person that I edited outside of Guernica Editions privately, and she mentored me with my business and just she kind of got me set up on the business side in terms of telling me the greatest advice ever, because I'm not a business minded person all the time, like when it comes to money.
So I think that's a common poet.
It's helpful to have someone. Yeah, it is. So it's nice to have someone too, like a little bit older as well. Like, it's good to have peers in your same age group, but it's good to have friends of all ages as well, because everyone, and not that where you are in your career isn't necessarily going to line up with age, but it's still a case of life experience as well, which I think counts for a lot. It's nice to have elders.
Yeah. Oh my goodness, what a thoughtful, practical, wise response. Thank you. Grace, how about you? Are there people that maybe you don't have? Like, I'm very cognizant that you said that, you were one place and now you've moved to another. How are you finding this about women or other people that help you, that mentor you? What's your response?
Yeah, it's been very eye-opening, having lived in a city and then not in a city, and seeing, especially during COVID, I'm like, that's just added a whole other layer of complexity to this. But yeah, I really felt that kind of lack almost in terms of readily accessible. Okay, a mentor that you can have lunch with, and just talk about life or writing, which I did do in Toronto and have not done since moving to Midland. And I totally, what Margo said about having peers who are not only in your stage, but also maybe they're more advanced, maybe they're earlier, different ages. I think that breadth of experience and the breadth of experience is so important to have in your writing community, and to be able to speak with them, to communicate with them regularly is something that I've really, really missed. And I think that might be why I really leaned more into reading, into reading a lot more poems and writing by women in the last year and a bit. And that has helped for sure. I think that reading another person with care is itself a compassionate act, because you're taking the time, you're paying attention to the words that they've put down, and that has helped. And I love the glossa as a form, because when you're writing a glossa, you're not just writing; you have to first read the other person and understand, or try to understand, what their point of view was, and then respond to that in your own way. And even though poetry is such a solitary act, there's so many critical aspects of it that are not solitary, that involve communicating with other poets, whether it's directly verbally or just reading their work. So, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
true. An
Again,
act of attention. That came out as, that is an ultimate compassion, is paying attention. I'm sorry to interrupt, Renee.
you're not interrupting. You're absolutely right. I was scribbling that down. Beautifully said. And please go on. Did you want to amplify that, Margo?
I do think it's an important decision when you decide who you're going to read. I remember doing that a few years back, where I was like, okay, no more old white men, and where I've done specific groups, like, and a lot of the writing that I read is by women. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be in person. I found when I was putting out my first book, I was in Toronto, and I didn't really have a community there, even though I would sometimes go to the readings, and I would be there. But it's a very big, like, city in terms of, like, people kind of go, they don't always interact, or they just interact with the people who are there. I have found Twitter and the virtual space to be, like, I've never felt so close to the writing community as 2020 and 2021.
That's actually really interesting.
It has created.
Yeah.
Oh,
What
Sorry.
do you think, Grace? Because we knew each other. Did we know each other before Guernica? I guess we didn't, but we're both on that space, and it sort of feels a little bit like a physical space.
Yeah, 100%. And I always found it so, like, one day when COVID's over, I'm going to make it out to Ottawa at some point. And I keep hearing such amazing
Yes, I
things
hope
about
so.
Ottawa and the writing community and just the literary scene there. It just sounds so incredible. And I totally agree with what you said about
It really
Toronto
is.
as well. It takes effort. There are readings, there are things happening, but it takes a lot of effort, which might be a disadvantage of
It
being too
does,
big
yeah.
of a city.
absolutely. I'm just eagerly kind of cheering on the sidelines here as I listen, and I'm so grateful for this conversation. First of all, big shout out to all the folks in Ottawa. I am really intrigued by what you're both saying, as you know, you're on the Guernica list, but also you've, in 2020, 2021, this pandemic, this climate emergency, the closeness that Margo expressed feeling on Twitter with her peeps, and Grace. I know you're both on there. I'm on there. I can't wait for us, I hope, to follow each other and share. But I've also experienced Twitter as such a negative, fractured, hateful, horrible place. So I wondered, I'm really excited to ask you this both, because you are practitioners, you have a point of view, you are active. Can you share, Grace, some thoughts about being active on Twitter and thinking about compassion and women and feminism?
Oh, that's a big question. Twitter.
Take it where you
Yeah,
will.
Twitter can be, if you fall down the wrong rabbit hole, it can be a pretty dismal experience. I've definitely done the doom scrolling thing a few times and caught myself, and I was like, no, this is just getting worse and worse. Like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later.
Yeah.
I think in any social media space, being able to choose the people you interact with and the content that you see that shows up on your feed is really important. Before, I would be following a lot of people. Anyone who followed me, I would follow them back. And then after a while, I realized that the people that I choose to interact with is a very big part of that experience. If you just follow anyone, a lot of times your feed will just be so just overwhelmed by things that may not necessarily be good for you to be reading on a daily basis, even more frequently if you check it every hour sometimes, which I do and need to do a little bit less. But yeah, I think Twitter, there are definitely like pockets of Twitter where it's not good to be in. For me personally, just as a woman of color, as a queer person, yeah, I can't imagine reading some parts of Twitter at all, not even on a daily basis. So being able to protect yourself and choosing the community that you are a part of, that can make Twitter a very positive space, I think. But yeah, Margo probably has more to add there.
Yeah,
That's so
Margo.
true. I just agree with you 100%. It really does matter how you're curating your follow list. And one of the things I used to do, I don't do it as much any, I guess I just haven't had time, but when I was really trying to build my community, and trying to sort of like get into this writing world, like, okay, how do I get in here, right? Like just trying to figure out this, like, where's the entry point? And I would follow journals, literary journals. I would follow festivals. I would follow the different like writers organizations. When I would finish reading a literary journal, I'd go to the end where all the bios are, and I would just look everybody up on Twitter. And a lot of people would, a lot of people were on there. And so I'd literally just go through the end of the journals. And at the same time, I would see where they were getting published. And then I would submit my work to those places.
Smart.
So that's kind of how I would find out, like, yeah, okay, what are the good journals to submit to? And just people put them in their bios, right? So that was, I always suggest going to the back of the literary journals and seeing what people are all about.
Yeah.
But also sometimes you like step off the safe part of Twitter. Like I feel like my Twitter is just all writers.
Yeah, she's frozen.
Book people, but every now and then I'll go into like I'll step off and be like, oh my god, I forgot that this.
Hey Leslie, if you.
Hi, Margo, you just froze for 1 sec. Could you rewind your thoughts, maybe like 30 seconds? You seem to be totally good now. It's just froze entirely, or else I would have just tried to figure out what you were saying.
Oh, sure. Can you tell me what was the last thing you heard?
Oh, God. Let's see.
Oh, well, you were saying some really interesting things, practical, visionary, a little sassy about finding entry points that are positive in Twitter and reading journals and going to the back end of journals and reading the biographies and following those people and then submitting to the journals.
Okay. Right. So submitting to the journals, following the people on Twitter, and then trying to avoid stepping off into the scary parts of Twitter, because it's easy to forget that those exist. And it's easy to forget that you are in a public space, and that when someone looks up your name, they can look up anything online. So I try to share more resources than to have things about my personal life. Like I don't get too personal on there, but I can still talk to somebody and have a conversation on Twitter without telling my whole life story.
I think you used a really important word, curation, both of you. Wise, practical, interesting. I am very taken with what Grace was saying about, the self-awareness of doom scrolling. I confess, Grace, I am a doom scroller, and I have to battle that. It is an addiction, and I have to battle it. But this idea of curation and choice, and for me, what I'm hearing from both of you rather beautifully and powerfully is you're taking agency to curate and to reclaim social media for purposes that are healthy for both of you. Is that too much of a Pollyanna statement, Grace?
No, I don't think so. I think social media, like any gathering, whether it's online or in person, one of the great things is that you can choose whether you want to be in attendance. And I like the idea of reclaiming the space. I don't think I've ever heard of Twitter and that used together. But yeah, I do think like there are good parts of Twitter. It's not very few things I think are 100% terrible. Social media, when it gets bad, is really bad. But when it's good, it's also very good. And if you can maximize your chances of being in that part of it, I think more often than not, you'll have good days on there. Yeah, that's my approach.
Oh man, I'm going to read out so that our listeners can do this immediately. Margo is at Margo LaPierre on Twitter, and Grace is at Thrill and Grace, and I'm at Renee Sarajini. And of course, there's the League of Poets, and I believe Aisha is also on Twitter, although I don't know how active she is. So I wondered, I think we're almost coming to the end of our time. These conversations are so amazing and rich. But circling back to the idea of self-compassion, compassion in communities, I'm conscious as a straight but hopefully not narrow woman of color poet that sometimes when we think of compassion, we might gloss over, thinking of a gloss, I gloss over the edges that have to be called out. And both of you, I believe, have identified as queer. Can you talk, just as we come to the end of our time, talk about that compassion and queer communities in the pandemic? Margo, anything that echoes for you there?
Sure. I always assume that everyone is queer. That's my starting point. And it works well for me because I will believe that you are into everybody unless you tell me otherwise. And I feel like that sort of that's my gloss, but it kind of keeps a good aura around me. I think it's fair to assume that everyone is queer. It was the other way around for a long time for people.
Yeah, that's a wonderful pivot. Like, why not? Why not do that? Grace, thoughts, comments?
Can you repeat the question, Renee? Just so I make sure that I have it right in my
Yes.
head.
Yeah. And I want to preface it by saying, as a straight but hopefully not
Mm-hmm.
narrow woman of color poet, I always want to create or try to,
Mm-hmm.
to try and be open, the open palms, as Margo was saying, open to the fact that I cleave to this idea of compassion, but sometimes we have to keep also spaces. I think we've been doing this conversation for righteous anger, for healing anger, for edges and fractures.
Mm-hmm.
And I wondered, as someone who identifies as
Mm-hmm.
queer and BIPOC, did you have some further comments as we come to a close of our conversation on that?
That's a great question. I don't know. For an ending question, that is easily another hour. But I think for queer folks, the compassionate aspect is interesting because so often it's assumed. I think that when we think about other, people in the community, and this goes for like as a Chinese person, if someone else in the community does something, there are different expectations for like, do we accept it? Do we not accept it and call it out? And that is one of the toughest things I think about being part of any kind of minority community, whether it's the queer community, the trans community, the Chinese community. It's being able to be compassionate for missteps, depending on what the missteps are. I think that is a huge challenge. And a lot of, I don't know how much of it comes down to your personal level of, okay, this is what I can tolerate and this is what I cannot. But I think about that a lot. And I think about that whenever, like, news comes out about someone who has said something in public or has done something that's not great, it's kind of sucky, and thinking about, okay, am I still able to listen to this person's music, or can I no longer listen to their stuff or look at their art anymore because it's just, I can't. It's just beyond me now. And I think for people who are in the queer community or in other minority communities, that's something extra that we have to kind of contend with, that perhaps a straight white man may not have to. Yeah, that is definitely another hour.
Yeah.
Indeed. I hope that the three of us can continue this conversation in different ways, and I so look forward to interacting with both of you on social media. Margo, any final thoughts in response to what Grace was saying so beautifully and thoughtfully?
Yeah, there are factors in a lot of those. I would say that queer people are more attuned to those decisions. I think everyone has a responsibility to be thinking about whose art they consume, and the straight white men have just as much responsibility, if not more. That they're maybe just less aware, and I think it does fall a lot on the marginalized communities to kind of bear this like awareness and having to be the trumpet. So I think those questions are on everybody, but I think the weight distribution of who ends up dealing with them is definitely unequal. As it comes to social media, just to bring it back to that, I did want to mention that I think a lot of authors feel like they have to be on social media and speak out all the time, and I don't think that's right. I think it's really important to take a step back when you need to, when we can't be fighting all the time. And as an author, you're not really getting anything. You're not getting as much back from being on social media every day as you think you are. And I think that if you think like you have to, and it feels like a job and a chore, and it's just a stressor, then that's time to maybe take a couple of weeks or take a month off, or just to protect oneself.
And thereby having more compassion and thoughtfulness and thoughtful curation and this reclaiming.
100%. We can't be, it's very difficult to be compassionate when we're burnt out. It's hard to have gratitude, and it's hard to be compassionate when we don't have the energy. So I think it's really important to cultivate that in ourselves, give ourselves rest periods, and then come back, and then we will have the strength and the compassion to be that person.
Oh, what a joy and privilege it is to interact with both of you. And Grace, I'm resonating deeply with what Margo has just said and what you set the stage for, with this idea that compassion, I guess the Latin root is to suffer with. So to me, the word has a profound implications of solidarity, social justice, equity, activism, and even anger. But the whole idea is, if we're always calling out people and not building them up, particularly in our communities as women, as feminists, as queer, as colored, then where do we go from here? And I think you both in this conversation have given us rich, thoughtful, practical, and somewhat edgy inspiration. So the people outside my apartment have started their Wednesday hedge cutting. So there's background noise, and it's, I think, time to wrap. I want to thank Margo LaPierre and Grace Lau for being our guests today on the League of Canadian Poets Feminist podcast series. A big shout out to Leslie Fletcher, our tech and admin for these series, to Aisha Chatterjee, the president of the Feminist Caucus, and of course the League. If you're not a member of the League of Canadian Poets and you like what you heard today, please consider joining us. It's Renee Sarajini, Saklikar, saying so long till next time. Be well, stay safe.